Carl Jung and the spiritual problem of the modern individual, the modern inner crisis. Beneath the surface of our busy lives, a quiet question lingers. Why does it still feel like something's missing? This video dives deep into Carl Jung's timeless insights on the modern soul and the invisible void within. We'll explore why success no longer satisfies, why modern life feels strangely hollow, and how our disconnection from the self has become the silent crisis of our time. But more than just diagnosis, this is a guide back to something real. Through the lens of Jungian psychology, we'll uncover the hidden forces shaping our despair and the inner strength waiting to be awakened. If you've ever felt like something's missing, no matter how much you achieve, this might be the truth you've been searching for. Stay with us. The journey inward begins now. When the modern soul falls into an invisible void, many people today live surrounded by technology, connected to millions, and yet they feel completely alone. Despite the progress of science, medicine, and communication, there is a silent epidemic spreading across modern societies. Carl Jung called it the spiritual problem of modern man. This is not a matter of religion or belief, but a deep and painful emptiness within. People wake up without purpose, go through the motions of life feeling detached from themselves and others. They search for meaning and success in entertainment and in relationships, but nothing fills the void. Jung observed that this inner suffering stems from the disconnection between the individual and the deeper layers of their psyche. When society no longer offers a shared sense of purpose, individuals are left to wander in confusion. They feel insignificant, not because they are, but because they have lost the inner foundation that gives life weight. This void is invisible. It does not scream. It quietly eats away at its self-worth, and slowly people forget who they are. In this state, even the smallest challenges become overwhelming. The soul lacks direction. The heart loses trust. One begins to feel like a shadow drifting through a world that does not see them. But it is precisely in this moment of despair that healing can begin. Jung believed that within each person is an untapped power, a seed of renewal. To find it, one must first recognize the pain, not hide from it. One must stop searching outward for answers and instead listen to the voice within. The invisible void is not a death sentence. It is a call to awaken, to stop running, and finally turn inward. In that space of silence and truth, the journey back to meaning begins. What feels like emptiness is often the first step toward transformation. When the soul falls into darkness, it is not lost. It is waiting to be found. Religion no longer saves, and the question of life's meaning awakens. In earlier centuries, religion provided people with a structured way to interpret life, suffering, and death. It offered not only rituals, but also a framework of values, a cosmic order that gave human existence a sense of direction. For many, belief in a higher power brought comfort during chaos and guidance during doubt. But in the modern world, the influence of religion has drastically declined. Science and secularism have risen, and with them the conviction that reason alone can explain reality. Yet as Carl Jung observed, when religion fades, it does not erase the human need for meaning. It merely removes the map. Without the spiritual scaffolding that religion once provided, individuals are left exposed to the full weight of existence. They ask themselves questions once answered by faith. Who am I? Why am I here? What happens after death? These questions do not disappear. They haunt the modern person in silence, showing up in anxiety, restlessness, and a vague feeling of being unfulfilled. When there is no larger story to belong to, life can start to feel random, and pain becomes unbearable because it lacks context. Jung warned that this shift created a deep crisis in the human psyche. The collapse of outer systems leads to inner collapse. When the heavens are emptied of meaning, the burden of purpose falls entirely on the individual. And most people are unprepared for that responsibility. They were never taught to look inward, to explore their own depths. Instead, they were taught to chase goals, status, and external validation. But without a spiritual compass, these pursuits lose their meaning. The loss of religion is not only a cultural change, it is a psychological wound. And healing begins not by returning blindly to old systems, but by acknowledging the inner void they once covered. The soul still seeks meaning. If the heavens are silent, we must learn to listen within. What once came from the church or temple must now arise from the heart of the individual. This is not the end of meaning. It is the beginning of a more personal and conscious search for it, disappearing in the crowd when the self is erased in mass society. The rise of industrialization and urban life created more than just economic change. It altered how individuals experience themselves in relation to the world. In traditional communities, people lived in smaller groups, where each person had a clear role, a face, a voice. But as mass society expanded, cities grew. Institutions multiplied and individuals became anonymous. The more crowded the environment, the more a person begins to feel like a number, a statistic, a replaceable part of a machine. Carl Jung observed that this shift led to a growing sense of inner instability. When we are constantly surrounded by strangers, we start to question our own identity. Who are we when no one sees us? Who do we become when our voice is lost in a thousand others? In mass society, the uniqueness of the individual is not celebrated. It is often ignored. People are expected to conform, to follow trends, to adopt the same dreams. The pressure to fit in silences the inner world, and over time, we lose contact with our true self. This creates a silent erosion of inner life. As people become more disconnected from their individuality, they become more vulnerable to manipulation. They no longer think deeply, feel deeply, or resist when their values are challenged. In such a state, people may surrender their autonomy just to feel a sense of belonging. They follow the crowd not because they agree, but because being different feels dangerous. The tragedy is not just in being overlooked, it is in forgetting oneself. The more we try to be like everyone else, the more we fade from our own inner vision. Jung believed that this was a serious danger to the soul. He warned that if a person loses connection to their authentic self, they may live a life that is outwardly functional but inwardly hollow. The cure begins with returning to the self. Even in a noisy world, there is a place inside that remains untouched. To reconnect with it requires stillness, courage, and a willingness to be different. Mass society may erase faces, but the soul remembers. It waits patiently, hoping that one day we will choose to see ourselves again. When rationality overwhelms the soul, science turns people into tools. As science and technology advanced, so did the belief that everything in life could be measured, predicted, and controlled. This rational mindset reshaped not only how we build machines or cities, but how we view ourselves. Human beings, once seen as complex and mysterious, began to be treated as systems to be analyzed, optimized, and managed. Emotions became chemical reactions. Choices became data points. The soul, once central to our understanding of humanity, was gradually pushed aside. Carl Jung warned that the dominance of reason, though powerful in material progress, came at a great psychological cost. When we reduce people to functions or roles, we strip them of their inner richness. Instead of being seen as individuals with depth and mystery, they are viewed as resources to be used. In this view, what matters most is efficiency, productivity, and conformity. But the soul does not operate on such logic. It suffers when ignored. In such a world, people begin to feel unseen, not for what they do, but for who they are. Their inner life is neglected, their intuition dismissed, their imagination suppressed. Over time, this leads to a kind of inner numbness where even joy and sorrow become muted. People may continue to perform, succeed, and function, but something vital is missing. Jung believed that true health requires more than physical or mental wellness. It demands spiritual integration. The psyche cannot be fully understood through formulas and logic alone. It needs to be felt, heard, and respected. Rationality is not the enemy, but it becomes dangerous when it believes itself to be complete. The challenge is not to abandon science, but to remember the parts of us that science cannot touch, the parts that dream hope and suffer in silence. If we wish to restore the fullness of human life, we must give space again to the soul and recognize that not everything meaningful can be measured or explained. Losing meaning in invisible pain, leading to inner crisis. Modern life appears full on the outside, but often feels empty within. People chase success, accumulate wealth, and fill their days with constant activity. Yet beneath the surface, many feel a quiet sense of despair. Carl Jung believed that this emptiness is not a passing emotion, but a symptom of a deeper issue. When a person loses a sense of meaning, life becomes hollow. The days blur together. Achievements lose their value. Even pleasure becomes dull when disconnected from purpose. This invisible pain is especially dangerous because it hides behind what looks like a normal life. A person may smile, go to work, and fulfill their responsibilities, but inside they are falling apart. The soul starves in silence. And because modern society often dismisses spiritual and emotional suffering, many do not seek help. They believe their pain is a personal failure rather than a signal from the psyche asking to be heard. Jung warned that when life loses meaning, the psyche attempts to compensate. Sometimes this takes the form of addiction, extreme ambition, or even destructive behavior. These are not just bad habits. They are cries from within. The individual is searching for something real, something lasting, but in the wrong places. Without awareness, this search can spiral into deeper suffering. The more we ignore our inner world, the louder it tries to speak. Healing begins with recognition. The loss of meaning is not the end. It is an invitation to rediscover what truly matters. Jung believed that within each person lies a unique path, a purpose that cannot be given by society or inherited from others. It must be found by listening inwardly and reconnecting with the deepest parts of the self. In the quiet of that search, something begins to awaken. Not every answer comes quickly, but the act of seeking brings life back into the soul. What once felt empty starts to breathe again. The pain does not disappear overnight, but it transforms. It becomes a guide showing the way back to a life that is not just lived, but felt. The hunger for power, the forgotten shadow awakens. When meaning disappears and the self feels powerless, a silent force begins to rise from within. Carl Jung called this the compensatory mechanism of the psyche. The unconscious does not remain passive when the conscious mind loses balance. It responds often with intensity. In the face of deep insignificance, the psyche seeks a form of balance by producing the opposite image, a craving for power, control, and recognition. This hunger does not come from strength, but from a hidden wound. People who feel deeply inadequate may begin to chase dominance not because they are strong, but because they feel invisible. Jung warned that this desire, if not recognized and integrated, becomes dangerous. It can possess a person, shaping their behavior without their awareness. They may believe they are ambitious or driven, but underneath lies a fear of being nothing. Power becomes a mask worn to hide vulnerability. The danger grows when this inner imbalance is mirrored by the outer world. Society often rewards displays of power, status, and influence. The individual, already struggling with inner emptiness, finds temporary relief in being noticed, praised, or feared. But this relief is shallow. It does not heal the core wound. Over time, the pursuit of power becomes obsessive. It isolates rather than connects. It inflates the ego while the soul remains starved. Jung believed that the true path is not to reject the hunger, but to understand it. The desire for power is a signal, not a solution. It tells us where the soul has been wounded and where healing is needed. Only by facing the shadow within can one transform this raw force into something conscious and creative. It is not about suppressing the drive, but giving it direction through awareness and self-inquiry. When the forgotten parts of the self are acknowledged, the hunger loses its grip. Power is no longer a disguise, but a responsibility. And from that place of balance, the individual can begin to live not in reaction to pain, but from a deeper sense of purpose and inner strength. When the weak turn to collective power, the path to totalitarianism. When individuals feel powerless and disconnected from meaning, they often seek strength in numbers. The pain of insignificance can drive people to join collective movements, ideologies, or institutions that offer a sense of identity and purpose. Carl Jung warned that when the individual self is not strong enough to stand alone, it dissolves into the group, losing its uniqueness and moral responsibility. The crowd provides a false sense of power. It speaks loudly but thinks very little. In such environments, people stop asking difficult questions. They stop listening to their inner voice. Instead, they adopt the thoughts and values of the group. This is not true unity, but a dangerous uniformity. The individual no longer feels responsible for their actions, believing they act on behalf of something greater. In this way, the loss of inner direction leads to external control. And when this happens on a large scale, the door to authoritarianism silently opens. Jung observed that mass movements often rise during times of psychological collapse. When too many people abandon self-reflection, they become easy to manipulate. Leaders who promise certainty, strength, and redemption gain followers not because they are wise, but because they fill the void left by a failing sense of self. The need for security replaces the desire for truth, and freedom is traded for comfort. This path is subtle. It does not begin with violence, but with surrender, one small compromise at a time. People justify their silence, their obedience, their withdrawal from personal responsibility. By the time control becomes visible, the inner collapse has long since occurred. Jung believed that the only protection against this danger is a strong, conscious individual, a person who thinks, feels, and questions. The strength to resist external control begins within. When we know who we are and what we value, we become less vulnerable to manipulation. Inner freedom creates the foundation for outer freedom. And a society built on conscious individuals is far more resilient than one built on fear. No one will save you except yourself. In times of crisis, it is natural to look outward for answers. We want someone to guide us, to tell us what to do, to show us the way out of confusion. But Carl Jung emphasized a difficult truth. The path to healing and transformation does not begin with the world. It begins within. No political system, no institution, no leader can do the inner work for you. They may offer temporary solutions, but the deep change must come from the individual soul. This truth is uncomfortable because it asks for responsibility. It means we cannot blame others forever. We cannot wait for society to fix itself before we begin to grow. Jung believed that every person carries within them the key to their own renewal. But that key can only be found through reflection, through silence, through an honest confrontation with the self. Many avoid this because it feels lonely. It is far easier to follow the crowd than to face your own darkness. Yet real strength is born in solitude. When you stop running and sit with your thoughts, your fears, your past, something begins to shift. You start to hear a voice that has been buried beneath noise and distraction. That voice is yours. It knows your pain. It also knows your potential. Jung saw this as the beginning of true freedom. Not the freedom given by others, but the freedom you earn by understanding yourself. To walk this path is not easy, but it is real. It brings a strength that no outside approval can offer. When you save yourself, you do more than heal. You awaken. You become someone who can guide others, not through control, but through presence. And that is how a better world begins. One individual fully alive, fully aware. The journey inward. The small door that leads to a greater truth. The way back to meaning does not lie in loud declarations or grand revolutions. It begins quietly with a small and often overlooked choice. Carl Jung described it as the path through a narrow door hidden within. This door does not open for everyone at once. It waits for the moment when a person is ready to stop blaming the world and start turning inward. It asks for honesty, humility, and the courage to face one's own darkness without flinching. In a world obsessed with noise speed and surface appearances, choosing to look within can feel unnatural. But it is within this quiet space that the soul begins to breathe again. The journey inward is not about escaping reality, but returning to it more deeply. It is about reclaiming the parts of ourselves we have forgotten, abandoned, or denied. Through dreams, silence, reflection, and even suffering, we uncover the truths that have always been there waiting to be seen. Jung believed that this process is not a luxury, but a necessity. Without inner awakening, people become easy prey to external forces. They follow trends, repeat opinions, and live lives that are not truly their own. But when the inward path is chosen, something shifts. The individual begins to sense the presence of something deeper, more timeless beyond fear or fashion. This small door does not lead to comfort, but to authenticity. It leads to a life where pain has meaning, choices have weight, and silence holds answers. It reminds us that the truth we seek out there has always been waiting inside, not as a final answer, but as a lifelong dialogue between the self and the soul, a dialogue that begins the moment we choose to stop running and start listening. Restoring faith when a small action can begin the healing. Healing does not begin with a dramatic breakthrough. It starts with something small, almost invisible, a single honest thought, a moment of silence, a decision to pause rather than react. Carl Jung believed that true change happens not through external noise, but through inner shifts. And these shifts often begin when a person makes one different choice, no matter how small. It may be choosing to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, or deciding to speak the truth instead of staying silent. These moments do not look powerful from the outside, but they hold immense meaning within. Modern life trains us to seek fast results and visible outcomes. We want to measure progress and control our path. But the soul moves differently. It heals slowly, patiently through presence and repetition. One gentle choice repeated each day becomes a path. Jung taught that every small act of awareness creates a ripple in the unconscious. Over time, that ripple becomes transformation. Restoring faith is not about returning to old beliefs. It is about learning to trust the process of life again. To believe that your experience, no matter how painful, carries a hidden lesson. It is choosing to believe in your capacity to grow even when things feel stagnant. Faith is not certainty. It is the quiet courage to continue, especially when there are no guarantees. Each time you choose presence over avoidance, truth over denial, or self-respect over approval, you begin to rebuild what was broken. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Jung believed that healing is a collaboration between the conscious self and the deeper psyche, and that every time you choose to listen, to stay, to care, you are restoring a sacred bond. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is to light a small flame in the dark. That single act repeated with care can awaken a sleeping soul. Healing begins not with a revolution, but with a return to yourself. When one awakes, society begins to heal. True change does not begin in governments, policies, or institutions. It begins in the silent shift of a single individual who decides to live consciously. Carl Jung believed that when a person begins to understand themselves, they also begin to influence the world in subtle but powerful ways. The healed individual does not preach or impose. They live differently. They listen more, judge less, and act with intention. Their presence becomes a mirror, inviting others to see more clearly. Most people wait for the world to change before they do. But the truth is the world reflects the state of the people within it. A society filled with fearful, disconnected individuals will give rise to systems that mirror those qualities. But if more people begin to awaken to themselves to take responsibility for their inner life, then the collective atmosphere starts to shift. One conscious individual is not isolated. They are a point of light in the dark, and light spreads. Jung warned that without individual awareness, collective movements become dangerous. They lose their soul. But when individuals are rooted in their own truth, they are harder to manipulate. They are not driven by fear, but by clarity. And from this clarity, better choices emerge. Families change, communities soften, systems slowly adapt. It begins from the inside out. You may think your personal healing is insignificant in the face of global problems, but this is an illusion. The most lasting revolutions begin quietly within the heart. Every time you face yourself honestly, you are contributing to a more honest world. Every time you choose love over resentment, understanding over blame, you build a new pattern in the fabric of society. One awakened person does not save the world alone, but they open a door that others can walk through. And the more doors we open, the more healing becomes possible. The more human the world becomes again. The journey to heal the world begins with the courage to face ourselves. As Carl Jung showed, the deepest transformation happens not through force, but through awareness. When even one person chooses to awaken, a ripple begins, and from that ripple, a new way of being can rise. The future does not wait for a system, it waits for you.